I think I already mentioned to you in a previous video that I didn't have a television in our house when I was growing up until somewhere between my 9 years old or 10 years old. I think I was, it was like end of the third grade or going into the fourth grade at school. And we had one, our neighbors across the street had one, and it was black and white. We finally got one, and it was black and white. A couple of years later, we got telephone. So things have progressed a lot. And our old, like I just said, I think I mentioned before that our television reception was so bad that it looked like snowflakes were coming down all the time on the screen while you were trying to watch TV. But that's not what I really wanted to mention. I wanted to mention that we actually did, on occasion, even with the dairy herd, we found some time to go to movies over in the movie theater. Excuse me. Got a tickle in my throat there. Anyway, we found some time to go to the movie theater on rare occasions, and it had to be a movie with some notoriety to it. The word had to kind of be out that it was really something you needed to see. And if that was the case, then we milked the cows a little earlier that night, and we tried to go to the theater and watch a movie. And our parents, I don't think ever went to see one alone. So if there's a good one, they tried to take the family with them as much as they could. Well, there were only 2 or 3 movies that qualified while I was growing up, and I'll just mention them. One was a movie called The Ten Commandments. That movie came out in 1956 or 7. So I would have been like a first grader age, maybe 6 or 7 years old. And to this day, I can remember the scenes from that movie. It was, for the time period especially, it was a miraculous movie. It told the story of Moses bringing the children of Israel out of slavery, and him parting the Red Sea, and even before, it showed him being found by the Pharaoh's court and brought into the Pharaoh, and his Pharaoh's wife adopted him, and all of that. It was all in the movie, and the part about the parting of the Red Sea, holy cow. I mean, you talk about special effects that they have nowadays. When those waters started to roll up and on both sides of the ocean, or the sea, and the Israelites went through with their cattle and their little wagons and animals, and anyway, they went through, and then the Pharaoh and all of his chariots were following him, and anyway, it was quite something to see all those waters fall in on the Pharaoh, and all the magician stuff that took place, the different plagues. It was quite a story. I didn't outline it for you there very well, but if you want to see it, I think you might have to rent it nowadays. Seems like the good movies, even if they're good movies, and if they're a long time ago, something about just the fact that they're a long time ago makes it so people won't watch them as much. And so then if you want to get them, you got to rent them or buy them or whatever. So we went to see The Ten Commandments. That was one. Another one that we went to see that I don't know how old I would have been. I might have even been a year earlier or 2. I don't know, because I can remember the movie was called The River of No Return. And it was an adventure movie set in the Wild West and on the river, and they were floating the river, and there was, Indians in the territory and whatever. One part I can remember is there was a scene where there were some Indians, and there was 2 feathers that came up behind a rock. It didn't show any Indians, but it showed those feathers. And I guess I'd been preconditioned or something. The poor Indian people get all these stories told about them. I doubt very many of them are all that true, but when I saw those 2 feathers coming up, I was just really nervous and scared. And I can remember ducking down behind the seats. And as soon as I say ducking down behind the seats, I think of a time when we had a couple of kids with us that were about that same age, I guess, and we took them to the movie E.T. And again, by the time you see this, you won't know what movie that is, but it's about a little born man from a different planet. Really looked strange. And the E.T. stood for extraterrestrial, so that gives you a clue. And those little kids of ours have never given us any slack on it to this day, because when they saw E.T., they did the same thing I did in the River of No Return, except it was a lot scarier, and they ducked their head down behind the chairs and refused to even look up. And so, without saying their names, my children know who they are. And we beg your forgiveness, but anyway, we weren't aware that you would be so frightened of a little E.T. Another movie that we went to was called it was a movie that Clark Gable and Vivien Leigh played in, and it was quite a movie. I can remember going to Paris and having to stand in line. Back then, the theater over there you had to stand out on the sidewalk in front of it. And it was quite a long line. So the word had gotten out that this movie was playing, and we stood there and got our tickets in anticipation. And now that I'm talking about it, I can't think of the name of the movie, but it'll come to me. Anyway, the movie was about the Old South and the Civil War, and it was quite interesting. And the cinematography was remarkable for that time period. It would probably not stack up very well against what they can do today with a camera and some make-believe stuff. But during that time, it was outstanding. And so those were some movies that we saw, and it was really quite interesting and exciting for us too, because we got to stop milking cows early enough to actually go see a movie like normal people get to do that aren't cow milkers. One of the movies that we went to see was a movie called The Track of the Cat. And I don't know who recommended that movie, but it was a real letdown for me, except it did kind of rivet your attention. It's just that when you went out of the movie, you try to think, well, what was that all about? And you could never figure it out. It was a Western setting, and it was set up in, I think, in Northern California or somewhere in the wintertime, in the winter months, and a family was up there in a cabin. And they, the name of the movie was The Track of the Cat. So you're always in anticipation of this cat, this panther, this mountain lion showing itself, and you just knew that's what the movie was going to be about. Well, it kind of was, except when you walked out of the movie, I mean, there was all this anticipation and all these lead up, and you just you'd be waiting with bated breath for the cat to jump out of the tree onto somebody, but it never did. It just made noises and growled, and I went through the whole movie and never saw the cat, not even once, and I was pretty bent out of shape about the whole thing. The Track of the Cat, when I think of that, it reminds me of another story, and I'll tell that one to you. It was a Sunday afternoon, and I would have been maybe 13, maybe 14, 13 or 14. And on Sundays, you just kind of laid around the house a little bit if you didn't go, if you're done, finished going to your church meeting. So there was a little downtime before you started the evening chores, because even on Sundays, the cows gave milk. So you had to get ready and go tend to the cows. But it was before that. And I was out in the kitchen, and there was a gentleman came and visited my parents. They went out on what we called the front porch. It was a kind of a sunny porch where you first come into our house. And I could hear him talking out there to my parents, and they were talking about speaking of a cat, they were talking about tracks, the track of the cat, the track of the cat. And this guy, a neighbor that lived on down the road a mile and a half or so, had been driving along, and he had seen in the snow where there were some tracks that crossed the road. And he didn't stop and get out and looked at it, just rolled down his window, I think, and looked at the tracks, and he could see that they were bobcat tracks. Well, that kind of perked my interest. I thought, bobcat tracks, the track of the cat. I guess I was young and adventurous, even though that movie should have scared me back a little bit. But the first thing I thought of was, after he left, was, I'm going to go find those tracks, follow them. And so I can remember I grabbed the 12-gauge shotgun, some shotgun shells. And my parents knew where I was going, what I had in mind. And for some reason, they didn't say much, which kind of made you wonder, because I was obviously going to go track a bobcat. I'm sure my mom said be careful or whatever, but they didn't seem too concerned, because I think they thought, well, you just get some exercise. That bobcat's long gone. And but I went down the road about a quarter of a mile. And sure enough, there across the road, there was this set of tracks. And you could see where it come down across. But that time of the year, there was an embankment on the road where the snow had been pushed. He'd come down off of one bank and cross the road and up over the other bank. And so I got up there where I could see it good, and I could see his tracks all right, and they just led off through the field. There was no bobcat in sight anywhere. I thought, well, I'll just follow them a little bit and see where they go. So I started following these tracks, and had to cross a fence and get over in the field where I'd make a little better time, see where they were going. I thought, well, you might be going clear down to the creek or something. That's more than a mile away, and I'm not going to hike that far, especially in deep snow. So I followed them. I had some boots on, and followed him over through the fields, and they were going in a pretty straight line. It's not like he was wandering back and forth or anything. So I figured he knew where he was going, and then I hadn't followed him too far till I looked up, and then I kind of put two and two together because he was headed straight for a stackyard of a neighbor's haystack, where he stacked up baled hay in the wintertime to feed the cows through the winter, and he'd come up and get a load of hay and take it out and down to he milked cows too in a little town not too far away. He'd haul the hay there and feed them. And it looked to me like that bobcat track was headed straight for that haystack. And I started thinking, well, let's see. Bobcats don't eat hay, so what's he going there for? And at first I thought, well, he just wants some shelter for the night or whatever. And then as I got a little closer, I could see where there were some rabbit tracks around the stack and a couple of rabbit trails coming in. Rabbit trails were where, on cold nights especially, the rabbits would get out and move, and they'd come in from quite long distances into those stackyards to eat because they couldn't get anything else because of all the snow. So anyway, I finally put two and two together and figured out, oh, he's after a rabbit, I bet. So I just kept following him, but as I followed along, I started thinking about it more and more, and I thought, well, rabbits aren't going to be coming in this time of the day. He wouldn't go over there and just wait for one this time of the day because they don't come in till closer to when it's getting dark. Now it was getting a little bit toward the dusky side, but it was still quite a bit of light. And I got over closer to the stackyard, and sure enough, he had gone under or through the fence. I could see his tracks and over into the stackyard where the hay, and then the tracks just kind of disappeared. He got onto some hay, and you couldn't see the tracks through that anyway. So no more tracks. But I started thinking, because I was standing kind of right at the base of the haystack, I started thinking, hold on here. If there's no more tracks, that means that bobcat might be up above me on the haystack looking down. And I looked up and nothing. Am I telling a good story? Okay. Anyway, I looked up and there was nothing. And yet it kind of put fear in me. I started thinking, ooh, I think I'm in the vicinity of the bobcat, and he might not know I'm here, but I'm pretty sure I know that he's here somewhere. So I just very quietly and carefully walked around the edge of the stack. I didn't want to get out on the snow because you crunch the snow and you could hear if he was there, he'd hear me better. So I tried to employ all the strategy that I could, and I knew I had a gun. So I should have the advantage, right? And I can remember going through alongside that stack and looking up, wondering, oh, is there a bobcat up there? And finally I got to the corner of the stack where this farmer had been pulling the bales out of. And enough so that I could just kind of peek my eyes around the corner and see that part of the stackyard, and nothing. No bobcat. That's where I thought he'd be, there waiting for a rabbit. So I thought, well, obviously he's gone off and headed down toward the creek or something. I couldn't really see his tracks where he went, but it was getting a little darker, more dusky, and I couldn't see all that well anyway. So I thought, well, I'll just stand out, walk over here to the edge of the corner of the stackyard, and kind of keep my gun handy and look. And I went over the corner of the stackyard and kind of kept my eye open, and there was no bobcat anywhere to be seen. So I kind of breathed a sigh of relief. in a way, because on the one hand, I kind of wanted to see it up close. But on the other hand, I didn't know, I knew they were carnivorous. They were flesh-eating animals, and after all, I was flesh, so I don't know. I've thought back on that several times since, and I thought I must have had a little courage back in those days, because I could have talked myself out of that pretty easily long before I got that far into the storyline and the experience. Anyway, I looked up again, and there were places in the stackyard where this farmer friend of ours had pulled the bales out, and sometimes they would come out, and others he could only half get out, and you'd have to pull some up on top and whatever, and eventually he'd work through them. But I guess what I'm saying is the feeding end of the stackyard with the bales in it had bales kind of sticking out, 2 or 3 of them, and I looked about 2/3 of the way up, and there was one sticking out, and you guessed it, laying right on the top of that bale was the bobcat. And he had his eyes on me. I mean, it was like this. He could see every move I made, and he was watching me just like a bobcat. And first when I saw him, I had to do a double check. I had to really stare and see, because the coloration on him was a little bit tricky, and he kind of blended into the background a little bit there. I guess maybe that's why they're effective catching rabbits around stackyards, because the rabbits can't see them. But if you think about it, it's a perfect spot for a bobcat to be, because he could sit up there and watch those rabbits come in. And it probably would have just been a matter of time till there would have been some rabbits come in there and start feeding on the haystack below him, and he would have just pounced on them. And instead, there weren't any rabbits. There was just me. What would you do? Well, if you're a 13-year-old boy, you pull your shotgun up and get your sights on him, and lo and behold, I decided it was him or me. And anyway, I pulled the trigger, and that bobcat did a half kind of jump off of that bale and just lit down below, and he was dead. Never even struggled at all. I didn't know the shotgun would do it that fast, but it did. And so I wasn't counting on all that when I left the house. I really wasn't. And I remember there was an experience that I had right after that's stayed with me even longer than seeing the bobcat and pulling the trigger and all that. There was an event, and that event happened. Excuse me, when I went over to that bobcat, and I was real careful. I couldn't see any movement at all, and he stretched out, and I took the gun barrel and just kind of turned it to make sure it was dead. And sure enough, it was dead. And I crouched up a little bit closer to it, reached out, grabbed one of its paws, shook it a little bit, and sure enough, it was still dead. And I guess I was glad it was dead. But what happened to me in the next few minutes made me kind of regret that I had anything to do with that. Because I looked down, and the colorations, I don't know if you've ever, you probably haven't, but the colorations and the spot patterns and the symmetry of the coloring on a bobcat is absolutely phenomenally, if I can say the word, beautiful, just gorgeous. And I pulled it out a little bit more, stretched it out there on the ground. I was just in awe as I looked at it. I looked at its eyes even, and the markings on its forehead and face, its nose, its ears, everything. Just a gorgeous animal, beautiful in every way. And I sat there and looked at it and held it. And not like I picked it up and held it, but I kind of lifted it up with my arms, my hands a little bit, looked at those markings. And I had this feeling of regret. It was just kind of a feeling that washed over me that I had interfered with something that I shouldn't have interfered with. And it made me wonder, you know, as I sat there and watched, I started wondering, well, what if I hadn't come along? What if I had just stayed on the couch when I heard that story about the tracks? And I just let that cat live his life and hunt his rabbit. And I don't know what his family life was like. There wasn't anybody around him, but certainly he had a purpose. He lived a good long life because he was an older cat. He wasn't a young one. And I started thinking about all that, and it kind of gave me a heavy heart, I guess is the way to describe it. And what made it even heavier is to know that I'd made it happen. It was because of me that he was laying there dead and stretched out. All that beauty that he'd been blessed with, colored with, wasn't going to be seen by anybody but me, and not very longer at that, so much longer at that. And I've never forgotten the feeling that I had, because walking into that stackyard, I was quite pumped. The adrenaline was moving, and the closer I got, the more adrenaline I had, and even up to the time I shot, everything was excitement, you know. But after I shot, the excitement was over, especially as I started looking at the animal that I'd actually shot. It was gorgeous. Well, I stood there and looked at it and had that kind of a depressed, heavy heart feeling. Finally, I decided, well, I'll get that cat by its hind legs and put a string on it and start hauling it for home. So there I went, gun in one hand and dragging a dead bobcat in the other, and headed back the same way that I'd come. And as I was going back, I crossed those same tracks that I followed in, and I thought about life and death and the brevity of everything and the suddenness, and I took it to a human level almost. I think I did, because it started to make me realize that there are choices that people make, me, that kind of end the natural flow of things. And that natural flow of things should continue on, I felt. At least I analyzed it that way as I started to think back and thought, well, why did I have those heavy-hearted feelings? If it was something really good, I wouldn't have felt that way. If it was something to just be really excited about, I wouldn't have felt heavy-hearted. So it was an experience I had with the Spirit, where the Spirit was trying to tell me, okay, you enjoyed yourself, but did you really? Was it worth it? And I've had similar thoughts and feelings about some things, not as poignant, I think, as that particular moment was, but certainly repetitious of that moment because I didn't learn my lesson all that well, I guess. And I won't get into everything, but I was always more aware from that point forward that my actions had consequences, that there was a moral right and a moral wrong. And I was a free agent. I could choose. And the choice I made mattered. Now, I could have been real frivolous about the whole thing. I guess I've seen others that have similar experiences and really get frivolous. I never got frivolous after that, even though I made some mistakes along those lines. But you can't look at an animal like that and realize that, without realizing that God had a hand in that animal, that he must have taken some pride in the beauty and the magnificence of it all. Well, so from that point forward, I started asking myself, how do I fit into nature? How do I, back to the transcendental observance of nature, how do I fit into nature? Am I a part of it? Am I, or do I just insert myself into it? And does it exist for me, or does it exist for somebody else? And I'll be honest with you, to this day, I haven't quite figured all of that out, because I think I mentioned in one of these others, when I was talking about Thoreau, that he made the comment that we all seem to pass through the hunter stage of development, what he called the hunter stage. And what I think he meant by that was the hunter stage gets you out in nature and lets you observe things. But once you start to realize that you can upset the things that you observe for the worse, starts to make you realize that maybe you're, at least if you realize it, then you start to think maybe I'm passing through that hunter stage of development. And on a young boy like I was, it really had an impact. And again, nature played a part in it, because it seems like when those things have happened to me, those really poignant moments, it's always when the sun is doing its thing. And in this case, it was casting long shadows. And there I was walking along with the bobcat, dragging it, and the gun, and I'd look at the shadows on the snow, and it was just before sundown, and I could see myself, and somehow it made it seem like everybody else could see me too, especially God. Anyway, I went home and told my folks what they'd done. They didn't really say all that much. They came and looked, but they didn't really pat me on the back and say, "Oh, yay, way to go," kind of thing. Because I think they were feeling some of what I was feeling, especially when they looked at the bobcat. So sometimes, sometimes little moments like that put you in take you out of one set of seeing things, and it changes what they call the paradigm. You start to look at things from a whole different point of view. And before that cat was shot, I was looking at things at a whole different point of view afterward. Anyway, after I shot it and started thinking and looking, my whole perspective changed. Excitement changed to gloom, and anticipation changed to regret. Those same kinds of things have probably happened to you in one way or another. I think the important thing is maybe not to just beat yourself up over it, but to ask yourself, why was I allowed to experience that? Well, I had agency. That's why that's why I was allowed. But even with agency and the ability to choose, there are consequences for bad choices. And heavy-heartedness is quite often the indicator that a choice was made that wasn't quite right. I'd made one of those choices, following the track of the cat. That's where it all started. And that cat wouldn't make any more tracks because of me. Now, don't rip up every picture or smash every video that I've made thinking I'm a bad dude. I guess you can if you want. Because I've learned from it all. I'm just passing on to you what I've learned, that from the track of the cat going into my own track coming out, and thinking and reflecting in the twilight of the sun, and those long shadows seemed to communicate something to me that I don't think could have been communicated in any other way. So I actually thank God for the experience. Who knows, maybe it was designed just for me. What was I to learn from that experience? And it was something that I could pass on to somebody else. And who knows? It would be nice to see the big picture and wonder and have some of the questions you have about the whys of life to be known items and things that you felt differently about. But God is the only omniscient person, and he can see past, present, and future, and he has a plan. And those plans sometimes include things that you wouldn't think would be very good or nice, either for the receiver or for the one inflicting the pain. And you can draw parallels from nature, from animals to people, and the same lessons apply, the same rules, the same laws. So I've become so reflective that I might have put you to sleep if you're inclined that way. But the track of the cat, I'm going to call this video, and it's not named after the movie because it was a lot more poignant than the movie ever was, called The Track of the Cat. But my track of the cat experience taught me a great lesson. Hopefully, me passing it on will have helped you with some of the same thought processes that I've experienced without actually experiencing it. I love you all. Good night.